I know that right now everyone's anticipating the COVID vaccine, aren't they? And the reason people are anticipating is because a vaccine takes away the fear of death or the fear of death for a loved one. A vaccine takes away the continual doubt, whether we will be in lockdown again or cancelled plans or whatever it is. We're all anticipating this COVID vaccine to help us with the death and doubt. And even though the COVID vaccine is new, death and doubt are as ancient as history, aren't they? Throughout life, it often feels as though death stalks us and doubts plague us. Death could be round the corner for any one of the ones we love. And doubt of what might or might not be harasses us so much. Life ends in death, and life is just full of doubt. And I know even though we don't enjoy thinking about death, I know that when we do, we all know it's inevitable, don't we? Even though some of us are extremely confident, others of us are overly anxious, we all know life is uncertain, that we can never be sure. There's doubt in every one of our tomorrows. One guy I read believes this. He said, there is no cure for death and doubt. And I believe he's wrong. I believe there's a vaccine better than the COVID vaccine that we need. And the preacher in Ecclesiastes injects us with it today. So sorry if I didn't warn you that you're going to get a vaccine today, but that's what the Ecclesiastes author gives us for death and doubt. The vaccine from the preacher allows us to cope in a life full of death and doubt. And Jesus enhances the preacher's wisdom so that we can live a life of joy even in the face of death and doubt. So let's think about death first. That's where the Ecclesiastes author goes first. He begins by observing that we don't know the future. Our future is in God's hands, not ours. God doesn't reveal what's going to happen to us, does he? So tomorrow, this afternoon, we don't know. We could be given a hug out of love, or maybe we could be given the silent treatment out of anger. We don't know. And that's what verse 1 to 2 tells us. Look at it there, chapter 9. But all this I laid to heart, examining it all, how the righteous and the wise and their deeds are in the hand of God. Whether it is love or hate, man doesn't know. Both are before him. It's the same for all, since the same event happens to the righteous and the wicked, to the good and the evil, to the clean and the unclean, to him who sacrifices and him who does not sacrifice. As the good one is, so is the sinner, and he who swears is he who shuns an oath. So we all have this before us where we can't understand what's going to come and we don't know. The only thing we do know is what the preacher says in verse 3. The only thing we do know, this is an evil in all that is done under the sun, that the same event happens to all. Also the hearts of the children of men are full of evil and madness in their hearts while they live. And after that, they go to the dead. That's what we can know about our future. Death comes. Interesting 3 verses, aren't they? But these 3 verses do mean that the whole karma idea is absolutely wrong. The nonsense that even some Christians say, where if you have enough faith, then you'll have a good life. Because God's not an idol, is he? We can't control him with our actions. Our future is in God's hands, and God is not in our hands. There's only one sure thing you can know about your future. It's death. There's nowhere to run. There's nowhere to hide. You can't dodge it. You can't escape it. Only death is inevitable. And it sounds awful to just say it like that, doesn't it? To some, Ecclesiastes is just a breath of fresh air because they know this. That's how they feel about life. To others, it's a shock in the face. Why are you just telling me that death's inevitable? Isn't that depressing? But we need to hear this. Because this means that life is hevel, doesn't it? What the preacher's been saying the whole time. Vanity of vanities. It means hevel of hevels. Everything is hevel. It's all fleeting. It's just a breath. Here one moment, gone the next. everything we're living for, everything we're stressed about, everything we lie awake at night about, it'll all soon be gone. Death will take it away. And as I was thinking about this passage in Ecclesiastes, I read Tim Challies' article about his son who had just died. And he writes, "My son, my friend," and how he was just playing with his sister and fiance and just dropped down dead, unexpected, unexplained by medical professionals, just in a moment, gone. How fleeting life is. Hevel. And the preacher then quotes a popular proverb in verse 4. He says, but, this is what they say, "But he who is joined with all the living has hope, for a living dog is better than a dead lion. It's better to be lowly and alive than grand and dead," the proverb says. But the preacher, he's not completely sold on this proverb. He practically says this: what's the hope of living that the dead don't know? Let me tell you our hope. The one thing we know the dead don't know is that we're going to die. And that's what he says in verse 5 and 6. See there? "For the living know that they'll die, but the dead know nothing, and they have no more reward, for the memory of them is forgotten. Their love and their hate and their envy have already perished, and forever they have no more share in all that's done under the sun." And remember that key phrase, it's important, under the sun, meaning in everything that he can observe and what he can see practically, this is what happens. Just from what the preacher can observe, the dead know nothing. People are forgotten. Love, hate, envy, it all ends because death comes. And that's our future. And when it hits us, it's hard. That's why it's a popular question on Quora. Those who know Quora is, it's a popular question site on the internet. And that's the question they ask. If death is inevitable, what's the point of anything? And you look at everyone who's answering that question, and they're all like, yeah, what's the point? One British evangelist I was reading about, he had a medical student who came to see him. And this guy had dissected his first corpse as a medical student. And he was distraught. He came to this guy as he said, "As I was cutting through muscle and tissue, I said to myself, if this is all that we become at death, what's the point of anything?" In the face of death, what do we do? How do we respond? And the preacher wisely says again what he said all throughout Ecclesiastes: enjoy it while you have it. God has given it to enjoy. That's his answer. Enjoy the food you eat, the clothes you wear. Enjoy your wife or husband. Spend time together. Enjoy your work. Don't think about the next thing all the time. It's a waste of time. You can't control it all. Be content with what God gives and thank him for it. You have a brief stay here, accept its fleeting nature, and get on with living. That's what he says in 7 to 10. Look at it there with me. He says, if this is all true, he says, "Go, eat your bread with joy and drink your wine with a merry heart, for God has already approved what you do." He knows what you're going to do. "Let your garments be always white. Let not oil be lacking on your head. Enjoy life with the wife whom you love all the days of your vain," and vain is hevel, fleeting life, "that he has given you under the sun. Because that is your portion in life, and in your toil at which you toil under the sun. Whatever your hands find to do, do it with your might. For there is no work or thought or knowledge or wisdom in Sheol to which you are going." We're to enjoy the good things of life, he says. Unfortunately, though, many of us don't do this, do we? We're more like the very worried sparrow, aren't we? We fritter our little time away in just meaningless pursuits. We waste our days as if we had an unlimited supply. We hold on to grudges. We have petty arguments. We get frustrated at little things. We get angry easily. We worry constantly. You name it. We fail to enjoy life because we don't realize how little time we really have. Because we don't face up to death enough. Just think of the person who's been given 2 weeks to live. Do they hold on to grudges? Or do they look for forgiveness because they know life is fleeting? Do they live as if they'll keep on living, or do they spend as much time as they can with who's important? They live as if each day will be their last. Is this how you see life? Because we need to wake up, Ecclesiastes says, smell the roses, death is real, enjoy life now. Thank God for the present, because the future on earth under the sun is ours. In the face of death, enjoy life, the preacher says. And Jesus enhances the wisdom of the preacher because he gives even more meaning in life now. Because Jesus shows not just the certainty of death, he shows the certainty of life after death. Because Jesus, the Son of God, broke into this world, and he told us not to worry, didn't he? To enjoy the fact that God will care for us. And he died and came back from the dead. Jesus shows the certainty of eternity. And that puts even more meaning in life now. It means we can enjoy life even more, knowing that some of what we do here counts for eternity, that it won't all fade. See, Jesus proves what the preacher believes in other parts that he talks about, that there's more than just under the sun, more than just what he can observe. There's a life to come. There's judgment to come. Every single person needs to work out eternity because death is inevitable. There's either heaven or hell waiting for every single person. And if you don't know or just a little unsure of exactly what's happening to you after death, then you need to look into Jesus. He can give you certainty, he can give you security, he can give you a sure future, a sure eternity in the face of death. Tim Challies, he finishes his tear-jerking article about the death of his son with 4 simple words. My son is home. Jesus enhances life now by providing a home to come. And I'd love to talk to you more about that if you want to hear more about that, and lots of people here would love to talk about that. And if you know eternity is to come already, and you know you're saved by God's grace, then you need to understand one purpose that lasts for eternity in this fleeting life is the salvation of others. So get caught up in telling people about Jesus. Your neighbor, your friend, your family, love them, share life with them, care for them, pray for them, and point them to Jesus. In the face of death, enjoy life, living for the gospel. That's the vaccine shot. In the face of death, enjoy life, living for the gospel, living for eternity. But we not only face death here, he also brings up how we face doubt in everything. What are we to do in uncertainty? What's the vaccine for that? When we don't know how our future on earth will be or what may come, what do? Because there's always doubt in what we usually expect. You can be fast or strong and wise, but it doesn't mean you'll win. We can't completely rely on human ability. Lift the weights doesn't mean you always win the battle. Get a dozen uni degrees. Doesn't mean you'll be rich. Doesn't mean that you'll have friends. In our perspective, he says time and chance throw doubt on everything. Death could come at any moment. He talks about like a bird just going around his business and then it's in a trap. Or have you ever thought of a fish, he says, just swimming along in the ocean and then the net suddenly comes. That happens. We can't know. See that in 11 and 12? It says, again, I saw that under the sun, the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, nor bread to the wise, nor riches to the intelligent. It's not always like that, he says, nor favor to those with knowledge, but time and chance happen to them all. We know that, don't we? For man does not know his time, like fish that are taken in an evil net, and like birds that are caught in a snare. So the children of man are snared in an evil time when it suddenly falls upon them. That's what he says. And then he tells a story in verse 13 to 18 about a city in trouble. It's surrounded, no hope, except for one poor wise man. And this guy, he saves the city. And what do you think should happen to this guy after he saves the whole city? He should be remembered. He should be told of for generations to come that he just saved the city by wisdom, except no one remembers this poor wise man. He's forgotten. He's supposed to be the hero, but it doesn't always work out that way. And it's like we said last week, if you remember. Wisdom is good, he repeats, but life still frustrates us because we still can't work out the future. There's doubt to what may be, even with wisdom. And part of the reason is because we're all sinners. We're all fallen. We all make mistakes. And so he talks about just like one dead fly can stink out perfume, so one little foolish decision can ruin a lifetime of good. Wisdom is good, but even with wisdom, we can't be certain. Even with wisdom, there's doubt. Just look at life and see. It's not always what you expect. That's what he says in verse 5 to 7 of chapter 10. Let's skip down there. He says, there's an evil that I've seen under the sun, as it were an error proceeding from the ruler. Folly is set in many high places, and the rich sit in a low place. I have seen slaves on horses and princes walking on the ground like slaves. So it's like, well, when a fool is raised up and a rich, wise prince is brought low, it doesn't make sense. But it still happens, he says. We think we understand how life should work, should be, but then we see that is not always the case. There's doubt and uncertainty in life. And so then he goes on a bunch of examples. He says, it's good to dig a pit, but you might fall into it. It's good to break down a wall, but a snake might bite you. It's good to quarry stones, but it might roll onto you. It's good to split some logs, but you might get hurt. And Lizzie and Ben have experienced that this year when they went to split some logs and Ben got some fly into his forehead and Lizzie almost got a hard cut on her finger. You know, they just went to split some wood. That's wise. But they got hurt doing it. And that's how life sometimes goes, isn't it? We go to do the right thing. We can be wise. We can get some wood split. But with life, things can still go wrong. We should be wise. He says we should be wise. We need wise. It's better than being a fool. But it still doesn't guarantee everything will work out. Life is full of doubt. Doubt in what the next minute will hold, let alone the next day. The preacher continues contrasting the wise and the fool as he goes on. It's still always better to be wise, he says. And then in 16 to 20, he gives advice. For the wise man living in a foolish kingdom, here's some wisdom, he says. Be careful what you say because there's a ruler in charge of you. And then we come to chapter 11. And it tells us the answer. It tells us how to live a life full of doubt, in the face of doubt. When we can't work it all out, what do? And here's the vaccine, he says. This is what we're to do. Take action with wisdom. Act with wisdom. When we don't know if another pandemic will hit, we don't know if our next decision will be our last. We don't know the perils ahead. So what do? We act with wisdom. Look at verse 1 and 2 there of chapter 11. That's what he's saying. Cast your bread upon the waters, for you will find it after many days. Give a portion to 7 or even to 8, for you know not what disaster may happen on earth. We say this wisdom like nothing ventured, nothing gained. You've got to risk it for the biscuit. And don't put all your eggs in one basket. That's what he's saying in verse 1 to 2. And then he talks about the rain. The rain falls wherever it falls. And the tree falls where it will fall. You can't do anything about it. In the face of doubt, if you just stand around doing a nothing, you won't get anywhere. And that's what verse 3 and 4 say. If the clouds are full of rain, they empty themselves on the earth. And if a tree falls to the south or to the north, in the place where the tree falls, there will lie. It's going to happen. He who observes the wind will not sow, and he who regards the clouds will not reap. So if you're waiting and waiting for everything to be perfect, Peter probably knows about this. If you're waiting for the absolute perfect weather without any doubt, you're never going to go and sow your crop. You're never going to do anything. In the face of doubt, take action with wisdom. You can never be 100% certain in this life. You can't be beyond doubt in this life. We're not God. And that's the point. So take action with wisdom. And so look at verse 5. That's what he says. As you do not know the way the Spirit comes to the bones in the womb of a woman with child, so you do not know the work of God who makes everything. You can't work out everything God's doing. You can't know everything God's doing because you're not God. And so in verse 6, in the morning, sow your seed. And at evening, withhold not your hand, for you do not know which will prosper, this or that, or whether both alike will be good. So just go ahead and do it. Take action with wisdom, even in the face of doubt. We take risks in life, don't we? When we buy a house, when we travel, when we try different foods, when we select a surgeon, when we love someone, when we choose to have a kid or whatever it is, we take risks in all of it. There's doubt in everything, isn't there? Life is full of risks, so take action with wisdom. I caught up with one guy the other day, and he was telling me how he's over this pandemic time, he's worried that another pandemic will hit. So he's just saving and saving and saving more and more money. And he's pretty worried about and anxious about it. And I said to him, that's wise. Because I was writing this sermon. That's wise. That's good to save. Good on you for saving what you need. But remember, life is full of doubt. Don't just keep saving and saving and saving and saving because of doubt and uncertainty. It won't make you happier. Be generous with what you have because this life is all fading. And you know, we take a risk when we give money away. It just feels like it floats down the river, and that's what verse 1 is about. Cast your bread upon the waters. It just floats down the river and turns the bend, and you never see. You don't know what's going to happen to it. But we're to be generous anyway because this life is all fading. Like bread on the waters. We'll never see it again, maybe. But we don't know what God will choose to do with it. We don't know exactly what will happen. But be generous anyway, the preacher says. And see, Jesus enhances the preacher of the wisdom, what the preacher says, the wisdom of the preacher. Because Jesus knows that we can't work it all out. But he expects us to act anyway. I mean, think of the parable of the sower. You know, that great parable where the sower just goes out to sow the seed, doesn't he? And some lands on the path, and some goes amongst the rocks, and some goes in the thorns, and some goes on the good soil, and the sower doesn't know where it's going to go. But what does he do? He's to throw out the seed anyway, otherwise nothing's going to happen. And he doesn't just get one seed and put it in the one spot where he knows it's going to go. He throws it out everywhere. And so it is with us. Even though we don't know what's going to happen as Christians, it can be tempting to just never talk about Jesus because it might go on the path or it might go in the rocks or in the thorns and we don't know. And we wonder, who'll listen anyway? What might happen if I speak up? And a number of things could go wrong, couldn't it? But the sower, he just throws it out anyway. In the face of doubt, take action with wisdom. Talk about Jesus. Talk about church. Take a risk. See what God will do. And don't just throw out one seed, throw out many. When I was chatting about this section with Steph, she told me of a podcast she's listened to. Podcasts are great. You should listen to podcasts. They're amazing, informative stuff. And she was talking about one illustration this woman gave, how she has this apple tree in the backyard. And the apple tree is just laden with fruit. It has so much fruit that the branches are heavy and it's just dropping off everywhere. And some of the apples, a kid picks it up and enjoys it. And some apples just rot on the ground. And some apples are eaten by birds and carried away. And the apple tree, it doesn't know what's going to happen to the apples, does it? But does that mean the apple tree shouldn't bear fruit? Shouldn't take action? And leave the results of that fruit up to God who works everything out. Stop second guessing every decision, every outcome, everything in the past. We can do that, can't we? Oh, if I did this thing different, then this would have worked out, and this would have worked out, and this would have worked out. Why did I do that? And we get so caught up and worried about all the decisions we make all the time. But we don't need to. We can't control it all. So take action with wisdom, living for the gospel, throwing out the seed, trusting God, producing fruit. Dare to take a risk with what God has entrusted to you. Be generous with your money to gospel work. That's what verse 1 is talking about. Speak up about Jesus. So in the face of death, vaccine is enjoy life, living for the gospel. In the face of doubt, vaccine is take action with wisdom, living for the gospel. That's the wisdom of Ecclesiastes that Jesus enhances. Let's pray that we would do that.